Yay Networks.
And there's so many solutions out there, right? And really encourage people to think of one product at a time. By putting yourself in that situation, that's how you retrain your brain. You know, we have to remember that our brains are largely wired for repetitive tasks.
I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. Today's episode is about microplastics. And if you haven't heard of the phrase, we'll be explaining to you what this is and why we're talking about microplastics in a podcast that is typically on nutrition and wellness. Because the reality is that these microplastics are actually infusing the food we eat. They are infiltrating the food we eat, the water we drink, and our bodies. And we'll be learning more about this. And if you've listened to this podcast enough, you know that I am not one to be an alarmist. And that's exactly why I love today's guest and why I asked her to join us. So our special guest is Dr. Sherri Mason. She is the sustainability coordinator at Penn State Erie. She's also a professor of chemistry there, and she is a leading researcher in plastic pollution. Her approach to sustainability is real life, real world. She acknowledges that there's really no way that we can go without plastics entirely, nor should we. So a bit about Sherri Mason. As a professor of chemistry, her research group was actually among the first to study the prevalence and the impact of plastic pollution within our freshwater ecosystems. And she's been featured in hundreds of articles, including the BBC, the New York Times, Huffington Post, also NPR's All Things Considered and Studio A1. Her work formed the basis for the Microbeads-Free Water Act, which was signed into law in 2015. And similar legislation has been approved or is being considered at various locations internationally. Among her accolades, Dr. Sherri Mason has been awarded the EPA Environmental Champion, also Excellence in Environmental Research by the Earth Month Network, and the Heinz Award in Public Policy. And as you'll hear, she has just a really easy way of communicating and translating science into real conversation, terms that we can relate to. She lives her life like we live our lives. She's not in just a bubble. And as you'll hear, Dr. Sherri Mason does just an incredible job of explaining what microplastics are, why we should care about them, the impact that they have on our health. And while science is still figuring out the full impact of microplastics on our health and the wellness of our planet, Dr. Sherri Mason is here to share with us what we know now and what we can do with that knowledge, changes that we can start making today. So with that, welcome, Sherri. I am grateful to you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be great.
So I was telling my husband, I was like, just last night, after you and I, we had our huddle call yesterday and kind of talked through, get our game plan. And I was telling Brad, I was like, I have a podcast interview tomorrow and we're talking about microplastics. And he kind of made this noise. And I was like, at first it was a noise. Yeah. I was like, does he think this is a bad idea? Like no one cares. Cause every once in a while I'll cover a topic that he's like, well, what does that have to do with nutrition? And I have to connect the dots for him. But in this one, he goes, no, I've just been reading about that. And that is some weird stuff. That's strange. And I'm sure that's a reaction you get a lot.
That, and I am still surprised at, the number of people that don't know anything about it. And I just it's my whole world.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of what is your head in the sand?
Yeah.
But I'm sure I'm that way with other topics. So,
and the answer is yes. Their head may be in the sand or in their phone or whatever else is that distraction, or it's something that I think people may see it or they may see a headline, but if they don't feel that either it applies to them or it's relevant to them, then they kind of gloss over it. So before we get into what microplastics are and stuff, let's talk about you and your background and kind of how it came to be. I guess tell us about your role as sustainability coordinator, because that's a really interesting job, and kind of how this arrived, how you got there.
Oh, let's see. Okay. So Well, I've always been interested. So I guess I'll start with kind of how I got here. Since the age of 10 and watching this TV show called Different Strokes, which some of your older listeners may be aware of, there was an episode in which Kimberly turned her hair green from washing it with rainwater, and it was quote unquote acid rain that caused it. But I was like a 10-year-old kid, and it was this moment, this key moment in my life where all of a sudden I became like aware that humans have an impact on the environment, and not just that, but that it affects the ability of other organisms to survive, and just kind of innately was like, that's wrong. And that became like where the moment where I became an environmentalist, and a couple of years later did a project in school that turned me into a chemist. So I knew I wanted to go into chemistry from the age of like 12, which is just weird, but
that's really cool. Do you remember like specifically what the project was? Is it something interesting to share, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were working on like oral presentation skills, which seems odd for sixth grade, but
Yeah.
I'm sure that there was some, kind of educational thing behind it. But we could choose a topic and then present it to the class. And I was like, I want to do something on science. And my teacher gave me this book and was like, choose one of these experiments, explain it to the class. And I chose why oil and water don't mix.
That's cute.
I know. It's pretty exciting stuff. You ask most men why they get into chemistry and they're like, I like to blow things up as a kid. And I'm just like, I thought it was really cool that oil and water don't mix.
Right. But so it starts out as something that is like oral communications. What are you going to talk about or describe? And you're like, science.
Yeah. So, from a pretty early age, I was on that path. And as I grew in my career, as I, became a professor and I was teaching, I just really, it started to kind of, you start from this kind of microscopic point, and my brain started to kind of grow out. And so sustainability is really about like, how can we as a species live in such a way that we do not affect the ability of future generations to live? Right. So basically kind of being in harmony with nature, that's the basic idea. And I think the framework that I really utilize in my profession is there are 17 United Nations developed sustainable development goals. And so this is a great framework for people kind of understanding what sustainability is, because it goes everything from ending poverty and ending hunger to racial equity and gender equity, and, teaching, getting girls in school, which most people don't really understand the connection there with sustainability, but it's a huge one. And then it goes into kind of those environmental things that we think about in terms of, protecting the land and protecting the water and climate change. But all around, kind of the understanding, the idea that we have to have economic development. People need jobs. It's what I tell my students is, it's really hard to get somebody to care about the fact that the Amazon is being destroyed if they can't eat,
Right.
If they're freaking out about how to put a roof over their head. And so you have to deal with those kind of very fundamental basic needs first, and then we can grow out from there into these other avenues that are important, no doubt.
So your route through your career, you were a chemistry professor, and you were at a different university for nearly 2 decades, and you've been at Penn State Erie for about 3 years. And you have kind of, your main role is sustainability coordinator, and you're also a professor of chemistry still?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then I get to do research. Research is a smaller component of my job now, but it's balanced, which was a hard thing for me to kind of step away from. But I feel like the role that I'm playing is just as important, where I still get to do research that I really enjoy, but I'm also really kind of helping our campus and really all of Erie be more sustainable. I'm working on an initiative right now that's all around the circular economy and how do we make Erie, Pennsylvania, kind of a a circular economy, and then using that as a model for other places in the United States. So
it's a cool
really,
touch point of like all
yeah.
three of those, to have the role of sustainability kind of be your focus, but then and there's engagement with students there, but then a totally different type of interaction with the students in the classroom. And then also still being able to do research. It's like you've kind of got the best where you can kind of merge all three.
Yeah. I have a great life.
So
I do.
So when we're talking about plastics, and we'll talk about plastics and microplastics, let's talk about how widespread our reliance on plastics really is, because it's beyond just water bottles and ziplocs and straws, right?
Yeah. There's a great book called Plastics, A Toxic Love Story by Susan Freinkel. And in her foreword on that, she talks about how, when she decided, okay, I'm going to write this book. And she was going to have one day where she tried to not touch plastic, and, woke up in the morning and like many of us, went to the bathroom and immediately realized she had already failed in her attempt because she was sitting on a plastic toilet seat, And so the point of that, so what she ended up doing was just writing down everything that she came in contact with that is plastic. And, within, she said, a couple hours, filled up like 5 pages, because it is just so incredibly prominent, our, from construction materials, right? Many of us have PVC pipes in our house to our cars, which are, way more plastic than I think a lot of us realize, to our clothes. A lot of us, look, I hate ironing. I love those wrinkle-free fabrics.
Yeah.
I love my yoga pants, which I, basically, like many people, lived in for the last year during COVID times. And, but all of those are synthetic, they're polymers, they're plastics. And so it's kind of difficult to really comprehend just how prominent they are. Oh, thinking of COVID, all the plastics that are used in the healthcare industry.
Right. For protection.
For protection. Yeah. And so, it's a complicated material. I do frequently say I'm not anti-plastic. I'm anti-stupid plastic. I have a really hard time kind of imagining. I think that there are some places in which the use of plastic makes sense. But there are a lot of places where we're using it where it just doesn't, because it is such a long-lived material, and yet we're using it to make these products that are intended to be used for minutes, right? Like a plastic bag has an average lifetime of 12 minutes, but the bag itself is going to be on this planet for over 100 years.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. So that's really where we need to kind of be looking at and thinking about our usage of this material.
And I'm glad you put it that way, because you and I, as we spoke yesterday in our huddle call, we both agree, I don't want to be an alarmist on this, and nor do you. And so it's not about saying we're going to rid our lives of every single source of plastic. And there's a lot of things that I think, we just consumers, it's like a fear factor. And I think media preys on the fear factor. Social media does. And there's a lot of, I don't know. I think we all see them on social media, the people who are just so elitist. And sometimes there's, the things that they're saying that we should worry about. It's like, oh, come on. Like there's so many other things that are way more important before we start worrying about something that's like so minuscule. So in this case, you and I will be talking a little bit about, we'll talk a lot more about like why this is a problem and stuff, but we'll be breaking down like, okay, here's how you can make the biggest impact in your life without completely uprooting everything, I want to say too, though, like in your role as sustainability coordinator, I would feel like it's a little bit like me as a registered dietitian, and people know what you do. People know what I do. So if you're like, if I'm in the store, people are eyeing up what's in my cart. So like, if you're buying like Ziplocs, are you like Amazoning it to your house so no one sees it?
I do get, I do get a little freaked out. We were doing, I'll tell you, I could tell you so many stories on this front, but I'll just tell you this one. We did an event on campus once called Take Back the Tap, where we were having people taste bottled water and compare it to tap water and tell us which they liked better. Because a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like the taste of tap water. And that's their kind of reasoning for drinking bottled water. And the whole point of the event is that actually majority of people chose tap water. But I had to go to the store to buy bottled water to do this event, right? So I'm buying these like cases of bottled water. Yeah. And I'm just like, oh God, if anybody sees me, what are they going to think?
It's like the paparazzis, like getting through like the back seat of your car. Here in New Orleans, I do a TV segment, and one of the common segments that I do often, we call it Love It, Like It, Hate It. And we'll pick one thing that's whatever the item is, the type of food or category. And here's the one or two that we love, and here's why. Here's the ones that we like, and here's why, nutritionally, of course, and then here's what we hate. So same thing. When I'm in the grocery store, frequently I'm buying these like it's and these hate it's, and I'm just tooling through, and I try to kind of, you are mindful that you're walking through with this, whatever it is. I mean, it could be like flaming hot Doritos that have the, or like whatever's got the red number 40 in your chips, and you're like, oh my gosh. And yeah, you feel like probably nobody cares, but we're self-conscious about it. Yeah. So there's a pressure on that. But you're moderate about it, which is what I also like. Like you're passionate, you're well-versed in it, but you're also, like you said, your microfiber clothing hasn't been eliminated, that you're still kind of like see the balance of like, okay, we can't get rid of everything, nor should we try. Here's what matters.
Yeah. And my daughter always reminds me of a very important point, which is, that there's a lot, the vast majority of the waste happens upstream from us anyway, from us as consumers. So I have to say that, the corporations and marketing has done an effective job. I mean, from the time of the crying Indian of turning the focus away from, upstream of us to us as consumers, and that we're the issue, that littering is the issue and we are the issue, and it's our fault that this stuff is in the environment. And, the reality is we are part of it, yes, but there's way more waste upstream from us as consumers than there is on us. And so you have to kind of keep that in mind and balance it, and realize that we are part of a society, and that it's a society that needs to happen, that needs to change. And unfortunately it happens slowly. Would I like to see things eliminated today? Yes, absolutely. But I also am realistic that that's just not, it took us 70 years to get to this point. And it will take us, some time to move in a different direction.
Yeah, you mentioned that plastics have really been only this prevalent since World War II.
Yeah. It's a fascinating material. I mean, because ironically, it was actually created because we were overusing natural materials, specifically ivory for billiard balls and piano keys, and things like turtle shells for hair combs for women, right? So these things were, and this is like that story about the woman who cut off her hair to buy something for her husband. And that story comes from the fact that, hair combs were really expensive back then, right? So they were this like lower middle class, couple, and the only way that they could, they couldn't afford these things. Well, now, you can go in any dollar store and buy a comb, right? Because it's made out of plastic. So we were overusing these natural materials. And so the idea was, well, if we can make something synthetic, if man can make something, then it takes the onus off of nature. And plastics were born. But it wasn't really until World War II when there was so much kind of focus and effort on this war movement that the infrastructure for the mass production of plastics took place. And so it's really, as a material, it has not been prevalent in our society. Basically, the kind of the birth in kind of societal terms is the end of World War II. So 1945, 1950, somewhere in there. At that point, we made very, very little plastic, and I think the most recent numbers we're making over 400 million tons of this material. And in total, we've made 10 billion metric tons of the material since in the last 70 years, which is the equivalent just to it's such a huge number. It's hard to put that in perspective, but it's a million Eiffel Towers or 100 million blue whales. That's how much plastic we have produced in 70 years. And half of that has been just produced in this century, right? Just since 2000.
And it sticks around. It's not degrading.
Right. It's because it is synthetic, right? It's made by man. It's not made by nature. The way that things biodegrade, right, is like a leaf falls off of a tree and there are organisms that can use that leaf as food, right? So that it's because it comes from nature that there are microbes that can use it for food. Nature knows how to handle it. But plastics are synthetic. They're not made from, they're not naturally occurring. You don't find them growing off of trees. You find them stuck in trees, but you're not growing off of trees. And so nature doesn't really know how to deal with it. And so it does not readily biodegrade. There are some microbes out there. And so, my Facebook feed, blows up with them every time we find these microbes that can use it as a food source. They're not prevalent. They're not common, and so, the lifetime of a piece of plastic, at this point, it's all estimates, but our estimates are decades to centuries, depending upon what plastic it is. Some semi-synthetic plastics, which were the first plastics, things like nitrocellulose, are a little bit more on the decade side. And then you have something like polyethylene, and that you're talking centuries.
And so when we talk about a million Eiffel Towers, that's the stuff that those million Eiffel Towers are sticking around like in our oceans or in landfills.
It's either burned, right? So about 15% of plastic every year is burned, incinerated, largely for energy. About 10% of it has been recycled, and 75% of it is discarded, quote unquote. So that's either in landfills or in the environment. It's estimated somewhere between 10 and 15% of that million Eiffel Towers is in our water.
And looking at this, everything that you just said, that's a problem. Like, that's bad that the plastics they infiltrate our water, they infiltrate our food, which we'll talk more a bit. But understanding this is why we're talking about this. It's not, I think it's hard for us to even understand. So when we look at, plastics, they don't biodegrade. They're not being broken down and absorbed back into that soil. They are infiltrating for that reason. And we'll talk to us about microplastics. Because when we say plastics are in our water, we're not seeing something that's like the size of a credit card floating in our water. But that's where, when we're using the term microplastics, and that's what is going to be in water or food. You mentioned that yesterday when we talked that there was a study that showed that honey, which we think of as like one of the most natural things, that there's even microplastics in honey. So talk to us a bit about microplastics and what that word means.
Yeah, absolutely. So most plastic items start as big plastic items, what we would call macroplastics, right? So think of a flip-flop or a bag or a bottle or a straw, right? So these are, relatively big plastic items, and that gets released into the environment. Well, the sun will bake it and cause it to become brittle, and then mechanical action like wind and water, cars driving over it, whatever, will cause it to break into these smaller and smaller pieces, but it's maintaining that it's still plastic, right? Nothing is chemically, like on the chemistry front, very little is happening. And so these macro items slowly break into these smaller and smaller pieces. And once it gets below 5 millimeters, which is about the size of your thumbnail, and everybody's looking at their thumbnail, anything smaller than that is by definition a microplastic. And, there's all sorts of history as to why that was set. And it's, on a scientific standpoint, we get frustrated, but that's the definition. And so that's what we stick with. So anything that's smaller than 5 millimeters is considered a microplastic. And they just get smaller and smaller and smaller. To the point where there are actually nanoplastics, which, they're smaller than a tenth of a millimeter is a nanoplastic, which is just insane. So they just keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's these, and while you can't see them, these, many of these microplastics, as they get smaller and smaller, you can't necessarily see them, but that's actually when they become kind of the biggest concern, ecologically speaking, or to human health, is because once you get below 100 microns, plastics can actually move across the gastrointestinal tract. They can be carried in your blood, and they can end up in your organs, your liver, your kidney. They can go across the blood-brain barrier, and they can go across the placental barrier. And there was a study came out just earlier this year showing microplastics on both sides of the placental barrier. So they are making their way into our children before they're even born. That being said, again, I want to go back to the fact that we're not trying to be alarmist here, right? It's important for us to acknowledge this and to understand that this is what's happening, and to also realize that probably at this point it's not, I don't know how to say this. We don't want to be to over concern people, but at the same time, this is the point where as a society we need to go, maybe we need to rethink our relationship with this material and make it less prominent in our society so that those things aren't happening. That's kind of where I'm at.
So not living in fear, but looking at what can we do to change it systemically.
Yes. Living in action, not fear.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a minute to talk about Billie, sponsor of this week's podcast and an Allure Best of Beauty winner. Self-care and routine are more important now than ever. So whatever we're using to get ready for the day should also leave us feeling amazing. So Billie has recreated everyday essentials by delivering premium razors and high-performing body care directly to you. Go to mybillie.com to get their starter kit for just $9. That includes their award-winning razor and a cult favorite magnetic holder. I love Billie's products, and you will too. They leave our skin feeling just so soft. And to express a little love for our show, go to mybillie.com/fueled. It's a small way that you can support us while also getting the best razor you will ever own. It's just $9 to get your starter kit, plus free shipping always. Go to mybillie.com/fueled. That's spelled mybillie.com/fueled. Talking about, the impact on our health, you talked about that they can cross the placental boundary. They can cross, our gut membranes. The impact that they have on marine animals. Like we've all seen the image of like a dolphin with like the 6-pack plastic ring around their snout, or sea turtles with like straws up their noses. But beyond that, talk to us about like on animals, like marine animals, there's been evidence of impaired reproduction, growth, feeding patterns.
Yeah, you named it. That's it. I mean, it's so you have the impact that the macro items have, which are those kind of more kind of prominent, right? It blockages. Frequently whales, dolphins will beach themselves because they're starving to death, and it's because their stomachs are lined with these larger plastic items. But then you have on the other end of the spectrum is what are the impact of these microplastics, and it's not going to be death. It's not going to be that these organisms are washing up. It's more the chemicals specifically that are in and on plastics that can cause all sorts of behavioral effects, oxidative stress, and those reproductive issues, because many of these chemicals are known to be endocrine disruptors. So that is, they mimic hormones, which are the chemical messengers of the body. So when we're talking about endocrine disruptors, I want everybody to think about being in camp and playing that game of telephone, right? And as you go around the room, how that message changes and how different the message can be at the end of the game as it was at the beginning, and what that means, right? I mean, at the beginning of the game, it's like, eat your broccoli. And at the end of the game, it's eat nothing but cake. Right. Right. And that has a huge, kind of impact in that case, health, right? And it's the same kind of thing with regard to humans. When those chemical messages get messed up, it can cause cause a wide variety of health impacts, from increases in certain types of cancer to decreases in sperm counts. And sperm motility, to increases in obesity, and specifically obesity in children under the age of 6 months. So this isn't they ate too much McDonald's and didn't go to the gym. It's literally a reprogramming of our DNA to store more fat.
Wow.
It's crazy. And there's a great book that I'll reference everybody to, that just came out this year, on this topic, called Countdown by Shawna Swan. It's all about these endocrine disrupting chemicals, and she has specifically a whole chapter on plastics. And it's a great book if this is something that you want to understand more. It's not in your head that we're having issues, that there are fertility issues increasing across the globe. It's not just that we're hearing about it more and we're talking about it more, which is great. It's actually scientifically, we are having a harder time getting pregnant. And some of that is because of these changes in sperm, and some of it is changes in women's reproductive health, our when we ovulate, how frequently we ovulate, the likelihood of us having a pregnancy, even the age at which we can get pregnant until our like window of reproductive capability is shrinking. So all of these things are happening, and something that we need to kind of be aware of and be making changes as a consequence.
I think we've all said it, like, oh my gosh, it seems like there's so many more issues with fertility these days, and we kind of marvel at it. And so, as you're saying, like, it's not just that it seems this way, it is this way. And this is one of the concrete reasons. And I would imagine the same thing with some of these very specific types of cancer, whether it might be certain types of gastric cancers that you think, gosh, 30 years ago, we didn't know anybody with that. And now we know 5 people. And knowing that, whether it might be directly related or indirectly related, everything that we can do to help minimize this and to help start to reverse the trend of what's being produced and what's being used, the better. So if all of that isn't enough, when we're talking about the influence of plastics on our health, fertility, the potential for cancer, the fact of what's happening with, landfills and plastics and our oceans, talk to us about the impact that making plastics in the first place has on our environment and the climate.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that this is kind of a little touched on topic when it comes to plastic, is really understanding that the starting point for plastic is fossil fuels, right? And as, I think we all are aware that like electric vehicles are becoming more prominent, right? GM has just declared that, in the next, I forget, by 2025, all of their cars are going to be electric. That's huge. That's great. But fossil fuel industry maybe doesn't think so as much, right? And as our dependence on fossil fuels for transportation is decreasing, they are very forthright about the fact that their plan B is plastics, right? So they're going to be dumping more money into making more plastics. And what does this mean for us? I mean, it's one is we know that fossil fuels are directly connected to climate change and greenhouse gas production, but more directly is the people that live in and around these refineries, which largely are lower income and people of color, right? So this is a definite social justice issue. They have higher incidences of very specific types of respiratory disease and very specific types of cancers, which is why, that kind of corridor along the Gulf Coast of the United States near New Orleans, near Galveston, Texas, where I grew up, that whole corridor is called Cancer Alley.
Mm-hmm.
Right. For a reason. And it's because of the refinery, and more of that refining is going to be going toward plastics production as opposed to transportation fuels. And, to directly connect where you are with where I am, they're planning a second build out of a similar kind of magnitude to what's happening in the Gulf Coast up here in Appalachia, where hydrofracking is so prominent that became part of the presidential election that we had last year. It was a big topic, is kind of the stances of the candidates on the topic of hydrofracking, and that hydrofracked gas, which I think a lot of people think, oh, hydrofracking, that leads to methane, that leads to natural gas, that leads to energy. Well, actually, a big part of it is leading to not methane, which is considered dry gas, but actually wet gas, which is not useful for energy, but rather is very useful for making plastics. So right now here in southern Pennsylvania, they're building what is called an ethylene cracker plant, where they're going to take this ethane that comes from these hydrofracked wells and turn it into polyethylene. And they have two sister facilities that are being planned just over the Ohio border, also in the Ohio River Valley, to two additional facilities that will also do this. And so there's this whole build out happening here. This, the Guardian came up with this, question, this headline on their paper about a year ago, will the push for plastics turn Appalachia into the next Cancer Alley? And that's what it's looking like right now. So there's a front end to this, to the issues surrounding plastics, not just at the back end.
I feel like
it's an important one.
You need to rally up your students, and maybe a field trip is to go protest there. I think that's going to be next where we're going to see Sherri.
Possibly so.
Yes, forming the human chain around the perimeter. What I also think is interesting and kind of relating, especially here in the Gulf Coast area, is when we talk about climate change and we talk about the greenhouse gases that are created from making these plastics, all of that is, we know contributes to global warming. And I think a lot of people are like, global warming. And they may not, it's starting to get more and more, I guess, real. And especially when we look at our hurricane season last year, in our area in the Gulf South, we had 20, I believe it was 20. It may have been a hair more named storms. It was the most ever. And we had them very late in the year, in the later months where the waters aren't supposed to be warm enough to support hurricane formation. And so what we look at here is very, very real when we look at the influence of global warming on the hurricanes that are so destructive in the Gulf Coast. And when you look at that in the relation to the fossil fuels making plastics and having that link. So there's a lot. So we look at, why is our reliance on plastics a problem? There's a lot from what it's doing to the climate, the environment, the global warming, and you can, translate that to all these other things we just said. The fact of how they don't break down, they do stick around for decades or centuries, and then also their influence on our health. So there's a lot of reasons that we want to try to minimize our reliance, but I don't think I even need to ask you the question. I would say, the question would be, so should we try to eliminate our use of plastics entirely? And I think we've both said the answer is no. But like you said, let's get rid of as much as we can stupid plastics or plastics that are just not unnecessary plastics.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many solutions out there, right? And so I really encourage people to kind of, because it can become overwhelming, right? And so you don't change the world overnight. And so I really encourage people to think of one product at a time. Just one thing, okay, I'm no longer going to buy bottled water, and that's it, and will there be a few times when you're out and about and you're really thirsty? Yes. That's going to happen. And you're going to want to buy the bottled one. You're like, nope, I'm not going to do it, because by putting yourself in that situation, that's how you retrain your brain. We have to remember that our brains are largely wired for repetitive tasks, and so it's really hard to teach us new tricks, so you have to kind of put yourself in those uncomfortable situations. And then you start remembering your reusable bottle when you leave the house. And then you go, okay, I'm no longer going to take a plastic bag. And there will be a time, this happens to me typically when I'm shopping for clothes. I remember my reusable bags when I'm going to the grocery store, but I typically forget them when I'm going clothing shopping. And so I've walked out of the store just holding the clothes that I bought,
Right.
and you're like, everything's fine. There's nothing to see.
You're like waving the receipt as you walk out.
So just you tackle one thing, and then it almost becomes like a little bit of a game, where you're like, okay, what can I do next? What can I do next? And, so, toothpaste in tablets, or, toothpaste that comes in glass jars. My shampoo and conditioner, I get delivered to my house in stainless steel reusable containers that I send back, and they get washed and refilled and then sent back to me, so you start finding these, what's the next thing? I use tablets for my dishwasher and my laundry detergent, and wool dryer balls with, scents that I buy in little glass, vials, and you just try and find, one thing after another, and you just kind of step your way through and find those places where you can make those changes in your life. And, and keeping in mind that I'm fortunate enough that I can make these changes. Like I have, financial resources, and, so not judging people who can't, and just trying to encourage people to do what they can, where they can.
Looking at it similar that I do with nutrition. So when you're encouraging someone to, make these nutritional changes to their lifestyle, sometimes people need just a full on overhaul, but we can't do that all at once. It's just not sustainable. And it's the same thing here. And so food wise, I would encourage someone, let's look at what you're doing and what's the biggest room you have for improvement. So if that's like drinking sugared coffees that have, 400 calories and 80 grams of sugar, and you're doing one or two of those a day, well, that's the easiest thing. And so same thing here. If you're going through and your recycle bin is like overflowing with the plastic water bottles, that's it. It might not be changing out your dryer sheets. Don't stress about that,
right.
And so kind of look and see, just like you would when it comes to food, and what are some of the biggest changes I can make that are going to have the most impact now, doing that with your plastics. And I like, it's a lot like nutrition, because you would also encourage someone to keep a food log for a couple of days, see what's really happening, sort of like the person you referenced that kept her plastic log.
Yeah.
And kind of track it and see, and like, what am I really touching the most that I'm coming in contact with? So I'm going to ask too, if there's sites that you have or websites that are really some of your favorites for things like that shampoo. Because I think a lot of people's ears probably perked up and were like, shampoo and stainless steel that we refill. Lots of questions about that. I already had. Can you pick what type of shampoo? Is it like different brands? So I'll get the websites.
That's Plain. Plain Products is the company, and they have a couple of different like scents, and they have an unscented. I like the one that has mint in it because it almost tingles a little bit. It's like rosemary and mint, and it smells really good. But it's not a huge variety, but it's really good quality stuff. So.
I'll link to that. I think it's a cool concept. Tell us about what you do when you're walking your dog, and how you like what you do with the doggy bags, because that's a whole nother thing.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for asking about this. So, first of all, if you are in the middle of a forest walking your dog, do not bag it. Just let him poop. There's birds and deer and, Sasquatch out there pooping. Just let him poop. And I bring that up because I was in the middle of the Grand Escalante, and I'm walking, and there was two, like a mile apart, two doggy bags. So they bagged it and then just left it there. And I'm like, oh my God.
And everybody's stepping over it, past it. Whereas if they would have had their dog go like a little bit off path, no one would even know it's there.
Exactly. So step one, but like around town, I get it, you want to be a good neighbor. So what I do is I look for, so reducing your usage is one solution. And next best to that is reusing. Right. And so rather than buying doggy bags, I go to the store, I, like most people, I go to the store and I buy bread and it comes in plastic and I really don't have a choice on that. So I save those plastic bags. I mean, basically any kind of bag that I come in contact with, we save those. And then those are, what we use to pick up our dog poop. We get the newspaper delivered to our house on the weekends and it rains sometimes. So that's in plastic. And so, even with never getting, plastic bags when we go to the grocery store, I'm still amazed at how many bag type things come into our house. People will bring over stuff that's in a bag and, we just save all those. And, that's sufficient. In my own backyard, when we're picking up dog poop, we use newspaper. And then we have a compost bin where we put the newspaper and the dog poop, and that's not compost that is used to grow food. But we just allow it to naturally degrade, and we're picking it up with newspaper, which biodegrades, and no plastic involved. So these are ways that you can just find it to start to be creative.
And reducing being the preferred. So, I think a lot of us see things that are, the reusable water bottles versus the plastic water bottles, or just an old fashioned glass. But if you're on the road, on the run, like having something that's a sealable, refillable bottle. So reducing and starting to kind of almost, if you wanted to do like a plastic journal, like a food journal, see like where is it coming in a lot? Reducing and then reusing. So like you said, if you've got the wrap that comes around the newspaper or the bread wrapper and you're using that as your poop bag, one thing that we have, and this is going to be like, nobody send me a hate email or like a nasty gram on social for what I'm about to say, but let's talk about the straw situation, because that's a thing. And a lot of people say, well, use a paper straw, and paper straws, they stick to your lips. Like I just don't like. But what we have, Brad and
they fall apart. This is me. I don't like plastic straws, but paper straws fall apart.
No, like we got to do better.
I feel you.
So we have this juice that we drink daily. It is, it's called Balance, but it's something, it's like a concoction that I worked with this juice bar here to I was like, okay, I want every single green that you have, and I want to add beets and turmeric and all this stuff. Basically, it's every bit of produce they have, and it's a 16-ounce bottle of it, or jar of it. And speaking of, it's in jars. And kind of to your point, I know that this is not something that everybody has the luxury to do, and I understand that, but I wouldn't take the time to do a fresh pressed juice on our own. And it's also something that from a nutritional perspective, getting the equivalent of 5 pounds of vegetables in one 16-ounce jar of juice is pretty incredible. And so when I look at the expense that it costs to get the juice, they deliver. And so to save money on that, I have them delivered just once a week, and I put 3 directly into the fridge, 3 into the and 4 into the freezer. But point being on all of this is, it's really murky. They're in the jars, so you leave the glass jars out, and they take them each week and refill them and all that stuff. So the recycled and the reusing is there. But when you open it, there's like, someone said, oh my God, it looks like the scum on top of a pond. Like sometimes it's just sitting there. It's thick, it's murky, it's intense. And so I don't want to just put the jar of that up to my mouth and drink it. Like I want to drink as fast as I can. So that's where the straws come in. And so my husband and I, we were like, oh gosh, we have to have some version to be able to suck this down quickly. So we buy recycled straws made from recycled plastic. And then because it's just he and I, and this might gross some people out, but because it's just he and I, we share the straw, and then we rinse it out and we reuse it. I mean, we might have it 5 days a week. We only throw it out when it starts to kind of split. Because again, made from recycled plastic, it's not completely durable. So after maybe 5 or 7 days, it'll split. We throw it out and we do a new one. So it takes us a long time to go through that one little box of straws made from recycled plastic. So is that, is that ideal? Maybe not, but it's at least a whole lot better than before this awareness. I think it would be really easy to have traditional plastic straws, each of us grab our own, throw it away, next day do the same.
I keep metal straws in my purse. And so that like, if we're out and about and say I order a margarita or something,
I love it.
Yeah. I have my own straw. I'm like, I don't need a straw. And then when I come home, I rinse it out. And, it's just, it's for me and my husband, and, it's just the two of us. And so it's the same kind of thing. And I just keep it in my purse.
And it's like, it's a conversation starter. I bet like a lot of people are like, oh, really? Like you have your own straw. That's fantastic. And that kind of goes into the assess what you're doing and see where can I make these changes. And so I think, again, with us, this juice that we do every day, it's something we do daily. If someone is going to a coffee shop and you're getting, say, that iced coffee, and so every day you're having that coffee shop iced coffee that's going to come with a straw, something like what Sherri just said could make sense. And so kind of thinking through what these opportunities are to have the biggest impact. So reducing, reusing, recycling are kind of the three, and in that order you say, like first, how can we use less? And then if we do use it, how can we use it again and again and again?
Absolutely. And recycling is last, and it's the one that people go to first. And that in and of itself is an issue. And like recycling, you recycle what you can. Be very aware of what the recycling laws are where you live, and don't do wish cycling, which is where you put stuff in your recycling bin that you wish could be recycled. You've just contaminated that whole bin. It's all going to go in the landfill. You just, wasted everything else that you did. So, be cognizant and only put in your recycle bin what can actually be recycled. And then you actually have the greatest potential of that actually being recycled. So it's better to put less in your bin and know that it's going to be recycled well than to put more in your bin and have it ends up in a landfill. So, but reduce first, recycle, is third. So reduce, reuse, recycle. And as you're making these changes then, and if you're like, this is something that you want to get kind of more involved, I really encourage people to make the changes in their own life first. But there are changes, we touched at the very beginning of this conversation about the fact that, more waste is happening upstream from us as consumers and is happening at the consumer level. And so also, encourage people to get politically engaged. There is a bill that has been reintroduced into Congress called the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. It was introduced under the Trump administration. Understandably, it didn't go anywhere, so it was reintroduced this year. And so anything that people can do to go online and sign petitions to support it, call their representatives and ask their representatives to legislation. It's really important and impressive legislation. It requires certain percentage of recycled plastic content in products. It includes extended corporate responsibility, where rather than we as taxpayers and consumers being responsible for plastic waste, the companies are responsible for the waste that they produce, that they, I go to the store and I, buy shampoo and it comes in plastic. I really just want the shampoo. I don't want the plastic. And so rather than it being on your responsibility as the consumer on how to deal with that plastic, it becomes the responsibility of the corporation. And when it becomes their responsibility, I can assure you things will start changing, right? And so that's, that is really important, because right now taxpayers, we're the ones who are paying for the recycling infrastructure, right? And, the reason why the recycling infrastructure is not great is because it is on taxpayers' back. And, and it needs to be the companies, the corporations who are making the money off of these products that are paying for that infrastructure to be put into place and are making sure that things can actually be recycled. We didn't even have a chance to talk about that, but because of the plethora, the variety of plastics that are out there, a lot of those plastics just simply can't be recycled, period, just can't. And so, and then companies make products that are difficult to recycle, where it's multi-layer, and I think kind of the classic example of that, right, is the juice packs that we give to our kids that is plastic and paper and metal all mushed together.
Yeah.
Right. But there are plastic products that are like that it's one plastic and what would seem to an average human to just look like a plastic bottle. It actually has like 3 to 5 different types of plastic in it. You can never recycle that.
How would somebody know? Is there a source or a resource that you would say to go to that can help us understand that a little better?
Not the multi-layer. I wish I could tell you that there's a good resource for that, but that's a little bit more complicated. But
sort of what you're talking about, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act.
Yeah.
Could,
beyondplastics.org would be a great website to learn more about kind of this issue. And they link to other websites as well. So that's what I would suggest.
And I'm going to include the link to that in the show notes of this episode, and also the 2 books you talked about, Countdown by Shawna Swan, and also Plastics, A Toxic Love Story. And then your website, which is sherrimason.com. So we'll include links to all of those. And then any final thoughts for our listeners as we're wrapping up? I think you've covered, like you've opened like a lot of conversation and a lot of thoughts that I think maybe people have read about or snippets, but haven't really thought deeply about what types of changes like we ourselves personally can make. So I think you've also put it into like these really manageable steps for us.
So I will end with my favorite quote from Mahatma Gandhi, which is, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And so encourage everybody who's listening to be the change.
Be the change that you wish to see in the world is also by far one of my favorite quotes. So I think it can apply in so many ways. And in this conversation, it is perfect for this, because the impact that we can make on a small scale in our own lives, on a larger scale as we get involved with, as you mentioned, the beyondplastic.org. Check this out. There's so much that we can do in our own immediate network and in our community to help support this. So thank you so much for your time, Sherri. I've learned a lot.
I want to thank you so much again for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, I'm grateful for your time carving this out. I really appreciate it. All right, and I hope to talk to you soon. I am so grateful to Sherri for joining us today, for sharing her expertise, her knowledge, and her humor with us. She takes something that is a very complex issue and really dials it down for us to understand how it affects us personally and what are steps that we can start taking right now to make significant changes in our own life. And I love, her suggestion. It doesn't have to happen all at once. Take a look at what we're doing. What are the behaviors and our habits that we have right now? What are some of the biggest things that we can do that are going to have the most significant impact? Let's start there, and then gradually start layering in, start habit stacking more and more of these things that we can do to minimize our own reliance and use on plastics and microplastics. As mentioned, I'll include the links that we talked about in the show notes of this episode, and let me know what you think as you incorporate some of these strategies. I always love to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.